Hey everybody, Dimitri here with Serg Supply, and today we're installing the ceiling kit in the Transit 148 high roof. Now, before I get too far into it, let me go over some basic information. Number one, Julie, if you're watching this, thank you for letting us use your van. This van is customer's build. It's partially done. We haven't touched it yet, so we'll be working around a few things like insulation and wiring that are already there, and it'll be a good opportunity to go over a couple tips and tricks. Now, if you've seen our Sprinter ceiling installation video, this is going to be very similar. Aside from the furring strip differences, the actual assembly of the panels is going to be the same, but we will go over all of that. As far as tools you'll need to get this done, I would recommend only 3 tools: a Phillips head screwdriver, a power drill, and if you have one, an impact drill, but that part's not totally necessary. Some tools that aren't provided with the kit, but maybe are recommended to make things a little easier is a rib nut tool. We use the Astro pneumatic rib nut tool. There's a link to that in the description, or you can always use a pneumatic one or one of those hand crank ones. Everything's gonna work just fine. One tool that definitely helps on some of the plus nuts is a longer thread, I'd call it, or a longer length thread rib nut tool. I have another link to that one below that I'll share with you guys. But in any case, let's move right ahead with setting up for this install. All right, if you can't hear already, it's raining outside, so please excuse any strange noise, and we've got some artificial light going, but let me walk you through what's happening here. We've got Havelock already up, and we have wiring kind of already up. Wiring is not an issue to have done before you do this installation. I wanted to show you kind of the pinch points here. We cannot have any wiring cross over these beams during the time of install. Try not to make the zip ties cross over, but if you do, let me show you this right here. There is a divot right here where the aluminum furring strip will live, and there's a hole on either side that you can use to zip tie your wires up. So if you need a zip tie, do it there. Do it on the outside edges. That's kind of the way to go. Now, they're not completely installed right now, but these Go Code inserts are, I don't want to say critical, but they'll help a lot with some headache. We are unable to install the centerpiece right now. We're going to pop it in at the very end, but these guys here, one thing I want to note real quick, we did have to trim this one down slightly up top. It just wouldn't fit underneath the rubber seal properly, so we trimmed it with some shears. It worked out fine. And then mounting these guys, typically we'd shoot these into the metal, but this is boron infused steel, I believe. It's incredibly strong. Don't bother breaking your bits on that. If you want to get this snug in here, use double-sided tape. I'm not going to touch it because the ceiling kit's going to compress these two in place. And again, the centerpiece I will put in later. Now, why Go Code? Let me explain. If you are not using a Go Code and you have those factory foam blobs, our kit will still work for it. There's a very sharp downwards curve that happens here at the end, and it makes the ceiling misaligned. So the ceiling panels will kind of be wobbly up here in this area where they join together. And if you want a perfectly aligned ceiling to go straight, that Go Code's recommended because the ceiling ends actually right here instead of all the way up here. So all of that curve is gone. The Go Code eats it. It looks really good. And more importantly, now you can hang your overhead cabinets all the way up here, whereas previously, you are limited to this point right here because the cabinets need a flat top to mount. And if you mount it up here, you're just going to have a big gap over here, or the cabinet's going to sit crooked. It doesn't look good. So if you've got the budget to add the Go Code trim kit, I would for this vehicle. But if you don't, fear not, it's still going to work fine. I'll show you the furring strip we use and designed specifically for this. Everything else is pretty much cut and dry. All of the beams are identical. You don't have to worry about any nuance between the beams. If you've got a standard high roof transit, you're going to have 4 beams. If you've got an extended length, you will have more, but rest assured they are all identical. All right, let's talk furring strips. I've got 1 of 4 furring strips for this kit. If you've got an extended length, again, you're going to have more. I have a video going in detail over the new changes to the ceiling kit. It's recently got a facelift. It looks better, more headroom, way easier to install, and ultimately way stronger. But we have 11 holes in this beam, but we only have 9 rows. Why is that? Well, I'll give you a quick answer. So on this ceiling kit, there are 4 holes in your factory beam that we're going to use with rivet nuts. And those rivet nuts are going to get installed. Basically, this goes straight to the beam with those 4. And then the remaining 5 don't have holes to align with, if that makes sense. Basically, there's going to be a combination of rivet nuts and plus nuts that are going to utilize Some existing holes that are a little larger than factory, or the standard factory 3/8 size we go for up top, or B, we're going to use them as pilot holes to drill into the beam to add more holes. The reason we're doing this is every single one of those plus nuts you add, you're bolstering the kit with quite a bit more strength. Instead of relying on 4 riv nuts on a soft wooden furring strip, you've now got a combination of riv nuts and plus nuts that are crushing it to the frame of your vehicle everywhere. So this is bracing it all up nice and tight. They're all the same thread pitch. I'll give you a closer view on the plus nuts and riv nuts real quick, and let's go over the differences and kind of why they're used and where. All right, for the life of me, I couldn't get the focus to work, but here is a rivet nut. So you guys can see this pretty good. It's a bit shorter, and it's meant to basically crush right away on those ribs down there. Now, in contrast, here's a plus nut. Quite a bit different. Okay, so what does a plus nut give us? It gives us the ability to crush down a little further down the road, and these slits act as like 4 independent arms that will crush downwards. And so these are the guys that are going to be passing through our furring strip and into the metal beam underneath, whereas these guys are only going to go into either the furring strip or only going to go into the metal beam. I'll take you guys inside the van and start with the rivet nuts and show you where they go first. If you don't already have this tool, it's a riv nut tool. I'll quickly show you how it works. We use Milwaukee, you can use DeWalt. It really isn't super important, but you put the drill in forward, in the forward position. We'll do it the super fast way. Put it in the forward position, we're gonna thread it. And when we thread it, the key is to look for the tip of the thread on the tool there. There we go. And then if you grab the tool tightly, like so, and you hit the gas, it's gonna crush that thing. Let's see if we can do it. There we go. And so now when you put it in reverse, my hand is gonna pretend like it's the metal of the vehicle. Put our hand in reverse, or the drill in reverse, and when we, oh man, there we go. All right, broke it loose a little bit. Now when we reverse out of the vehicle, you can just use the smooth bearings on this guy to back it out. If you're putting a lot of miles on these tools, you may have to do a little bit of this action, but generally speaking, that's as simple as it is. Now, the reason I wanted to mention using the different tool linked below, which I don't have here, so we're gonna make this tool work today, is look at the size difference here. I want this thread to poke out the top of here, but this tool isn't long enough. So when I thread this guy on, I caught a scary amount of thread, and I've got about an 1/8 inch gap here. So realistically, if I put this all the way down, I'm only grabbing on to maybe 3/16 of the thread in the plus nut. It's gonna work fine. It's just a little sketchy for my taste. So if you got the budget, grab that second tool. If not, this will work fine. Only one tip is when you screw this in, let's do it by hand. We're gonna screw this in all the way down. Just make sure you back it out maybe a half turn. You don't want it seated all the way down because the gear inside isn't gonna catch properly and it could kind of mess up your tool. So that's my tip. Let's get inside, put some rib nuts in. Work on our way from the center. Here's the dead center of the ceiling. We're gonna skip over this hole here. That's the first rib nut we're gonna put in. And the next one is gonna be right down here. Now, rib nut won't fit in that hole. That's where this tool comes in handy. This is that step bit that was included with your kit, and it's meant to drill the holes out to the same exact diameter as the rivet nut. So it's as easy as putting this in there, and you're done. Now, this is way too short to punch the outside of the vehicle, so you can really rip through with these, kind of go buck wild. But in essence, it's as simple as this. There you go. Now we're rib nut ready. Because of the mix of hardware that holds these up, I'm going to be very deliberate about showing you guys how every single one of these goes before we move on to the next step. So first thing here, we've got all 4 of those rivet nuts in, but we're only going to install the first 2 on the inside, which will be these holes right here. How does this install? Just like so. It is a 1.25 inch long pan head screw, not the cone-shaped flat head screws. These are pan head screws with the same washers that you're going to use to assemble your union panels later. Now, don't feel shy, dig out of that bag. The general process is I'm going to take a screwdriver, I'm going to put these 2 in, I'm going to line the beam as straight as I can, And then we're going to move on to the outer. We're just going to work our way from the center outwards, and I'll take you guys through every step of the way. All right, next up on the menu is the plus nut. Again, I'll back it out all the way. I will thread this in by hand as far as it goes, and then I'm going to go back out half turn. Voila. We're going to put this dead center right in the middle of the beam. I've aligned it straight as I can with the beam. Let's move on to the plus nut. Emphasis on put as much upwards pressure as you can. We really want the beam to be as tight to the metal when we put this in so that the barbs don't expand between the two layers. We want them to catch both. Awesome. Moving on to the next two holes. These are going to be inside the first ones we put in, but outside the center one. I'm going to take my step bit. I will use the hole in the aluminum as a kind of a drilling guide. I'll make the holes, and then we're going to put two more plus nuts, one on each side. Ladies and gentlemen, today's a tragic day. We bury my Milwaukee. I finally killed it. You DeWalt lovers out there, you can rejoice now, you finally won. I'll go grab the DeWalt and finish the job. See how she does? Milwaukee guys are gonna say, well, you already did most of the job. You started it. DeWalt guys, obviously, have their own opinions on things, but I'm gonna stay out of this one. Okay, these next two are rivet nuts. They are not plus nuts. They are right outside the initial screws we put in, those pan head with washers. Pretty simple, cut and dry. These do not go into the metal beam. There is quite a distance between the furring strip and the metal beam there. So these will just be rivet nuts in the furring strip only. And when you put fasteners in here, those fasteners will be shorter. So if you're installing this later, you go back to the video and you see, why are my ceiling panels on row 4 and 5 lower than the others? It's because you used longer screws when you should have used the shorter ones. Let's continue right ahead. Woo! This thing's got torque. Okay. So the next two are going to line up already. You already have those rib nuts in. Don't do anything with them. The last two on the far outside, we're going to drill out and put two more plus nuts. All right, and the last two on the far outside are going to be plus nuts. Now we skipped one. There's already a rib nut underneath it. Don't have to do anything with that one. For these guys here, there's two kind of ways to do it. There's the easy way, I'd say, and the hard way. The easy way, maybe the lazy way, would be to try to get a plus nut through both layers up into the beam. The hard way, the recommended way, would be for you to ditch the plus nut, put a riv nut in that piloted hole, move the beam out of the way, and just get that riv nut in there and then put it right back. So when we put that outside row, it'll crush between the two anyway. It doesn't bolster as much of the frame, but there's like a little bit of a gap, so it tends to want to flare out. Now, I have a plus nut installed on the other side that obviously flared a little bit early, and I want to show you guys how to extract that in case it happens to you. But we're going to go back and we're just going to add riv nuts, which we have extras included in your kit for this reason. We're going to put those riv nuts on these outer wings where we did the pilot holes. and continue on. To extract a rivet nut or a plus nut, we use a tried and true method. Grab a larger drill bit. I think this is there's no way this is 5/16, it's probably 1/2 inch. But the idea is that the drill bit should be larger than the outer barrel of the plus nut, which this is more than large enough. And what we're gonna do is drill right up the center of the plus nut and try to drill away that brass ring so that it separates from the rest of it and we could just pop it right out. This will work for rivet nuts too. If you're gonna do the rivet nuts, we use a 3/8 bit. For the plus nuts, I'm going with something a little beefier just because the flange on that plus nut's that much beefier. So at this stage in the process, this already has some plus nuts in. We're just gonna bend this beam downwards. It's aluminum. If it was stainless, good luck, but aluminum's gonna move out of the way just fine. So I'm going to pull this out of the way and install this rivet nut in that piloted hole. The metal's a little bit thicker back there, so it makes clamping for those plus nuts just that bit trickier. The main reasons why you may want to do this: if you're going to hang overhead cabinets of ours, you will want to use the rivet nut method. If you're just going to hang ceiling panels, you may not need it. Don't worry about it. Soft bags probably also won't need this. But in this case, this build, I believe, is getting our Murphy bed system. It is going to hang on this rivet nut, so it's important for us to get the best hold possible. So moving this out of the way. All right. I'm just going to put this here as a bit of a placeholder on each side. I'm going to remove it later, but I want this beam kind of out of the way as I'm working, and it certainly wouldn't hurt to get her crushed down a little bit better. All right, let's move on. First beam is in. I just want to walk you through the hardware just in case one more time. Outer row could be plus nut, but riv nut's recommended. We got riv nut, riv nut, riv nut, plus nut, plus nut, plus nut, riv nut, riv nut, riv nut, and then riv nut slash plus nut. Now, and not every van is built the same, and I'm going to do my best in the lighting we have to show you what I mean. Let's peek under the hood here and look at where this beam gets welded to the outer frame of the van. You see that gap on that side? You see that gap on that side? Slightly different, right? Let's go all the way up to the front here and look at this one. Gap on the left, not really much of a gap on the right. This one is completely egregious. Look at that gap. It's huge. It's at least a 1/4 inch on this side. No gap on that side. I know it's probably impossible to see. And then this guy right here is the only beam that's perfectly centered. Why do I mention this? When you're mounting your screws or your ceiling panels to these riv nuts, these are carrying the assumption that these are somewhat centered. That may not be the case. The QA for Ford, I'm not going to comment on it, but you won't always get a perfect fit. And that's the same thing whether it's a Sprinter or a Transit. So some of the holes in the ceiling kit, well, all of the holes are actually 1/2 inch in diameter, even though the thread is only 1/4 inch diameter. And the reason for that is we expect you might have to shift that hole forward or back to get it to fit. The other thing is the finish washer is intentionally 3/4 and not slightly larger like 5/8, so that if you do need to widen out a hole slightly to the front, back, left, right, that finish washer is just going to cover it all up. So things to look out for as you're working through this. Not every van comes off the lot perfectly, and it's maybe unrealistic to expect that. Here we are with the ceiling. Now the beams are in on the inside, and I want to quickly walk you through how the rows attach. And I intentionally chose the most pain in the butt part of it, and that's going to be around the max air fan cutouts if we make these for you. Let me get down a little lower. All right, so this is a union panel. Let's get this. There we go. This is a union panel for the ceiling kit. The holes on the union panels coincide with the holes on the ceiling panels. The back sides of the ceiling panels all have labels marked into them. Arrows will point forward, and you've got a series of numbers and letters. Now, A is the front, C is the back, or D is the back. It's alphabetical, so lower letters, A, B, C, they go in that order towards the rear, and arrows always point forward in case you didn't know. The numbers, however, are the row numbers. Now, the center row is row 1. The rows work their way towards the outside. Your driver's side is going to be all your even numbers, and your passenger side are all the odd numbers. So this is row 3. This will be passenger side row that's next up after the center row, row 1. And we're going to assemble it. Now, chose this on purpose because you've got a few wacky holes here. We've got our normal hole for mounting the panel. This is that 1/2 inch diameter hole. We've got this big countersunk hole. You may ask, what is that for? Well, if you recall, on the beams, there are 2 screws currently holding each of those beams in place. Of course, the plus nuts are still there, but those 2 screws will live inside these pockets. And we've made countersunk clearance cuts, I'll call them that, to clear those screw heads. So let's get on to union panel mounting. First thing you would do is line up your panels, approximately speaking, and get a little bit of wood glue. This part isn't absolutely necessary, but it helps, at least we find it helps a lot with vibration. We're just going to put a generous amount there and put this in place. Next, grab these flat washers that you also use them actually for the furring strips. And then these posi screws. Now these have very unique heads that will catch the washer and not much else. And it will have a nice flush kind of finish. Grab your Phillips head screwdriver. Better the screwdriver, the better quality of install here. I'm not going to tighten it down all the way. I'm just going to start all 4 of these right now. So there's 2 out of 4. See if we can get lucky. Do the other 2 now. I'm going to adjust this and get you guys a little bit closer. Excuse the jogging here. There we go. All right. They kind of just drop in place when you hit them. And these don't have sharp tips, so don't worry about starting new holes. I promise you, you won't be able to. And if you do, you've got the strength of Hercules. Okay, so before I tighten this down, first thing is grab your shims. Now, this row is a little funky because it's narrow, because there's a fan cutout. But we slide the shims in from the front, from the back. I'll press the rows together. I'll align them as well as I can. And I'm only going to tighten one side for now, because these can come loose. Don't over tighten. Once you feel it's gripped and pulled this together and you don't see a gap, that's it. You don't have to kill these. In fact, if you over tighten them, you might actually create some gap, rip them apart, and have to add screws of your own later. We don't want that. Now, let's line these up as well as one can. Let me try to get a better overhead view here. All right. Union panel's a little crooked. There we go. And I love how that sits. That is perfectly aligned. I'm going to keep pressure on this, torque these down. There we go. So, all done with that one. Let's move this forward along the assembly line. Here's the next spot. I know this is kind of a long video already, but I really want to get every detail here. Put a little bit of glue. Get our next union panel, which is Baltic birch. This one's a little hairy. I grabbed it fresh out the pile. But drop this in place. Drop our screws in. And go crazy. All right. There we go. So you get one, the rest kind of fall in place. But usually the first one is the hardest one to start. And the gap, in case anybody's curious, is a very consistent 1/8 inch between the rows, front to back, and side to side. That's exactly the width of these shims. Now these are going to be a little easier because we'll be able to see better. I'll slide the shim in this side, slide the shim in that side. And again, we're only going to tighten one side for now. There we go. There we go. And I like how that's sitting. Let's go ahead and crank it. All right, there we go. This row is assembled. We can take these shims out and use them for the install. I've already gone ahead and assembled all of the other rows, and we're going to carry it in the van and install it. But before we do that, if you did have us do your max air fan cutout, there's this thin section that might break. It's the weakest part. So when you're carrying these rows, do not lift them like this. Lift them like this. And really try to get hands on both sides of this. Get a helping hand if you have it. Have a friend help you out. And just be safe. You know, better safe than sorry. All right, you may have opened your kit and you're wondering, what the heck is this thing? I mentioned at the start of the video that if you have the ability to get the Go code, please do. If you don't have the ability to get the go code, this is the solution. So this guy here has these U-shaped channels. This goes between the ceiling kit and the first beam. And you're gonna have to swap out those fasteners for the longer ones. Now we've included a set of longer fasteners for all of these. So the major changes will be that instead of 1.25" fasteners, there'll be 2" fasteners on across all of them. And the caveat is obviously row 4 and 5. We'll touch base on that in a little bit. But the best way to do this is start mounting your first row, get it up right down the center, and then snap this, just basically feed it over the center of the row and slide it into the screw head and align it the best you can. That's the way to get that started. So if you're doing factory foam blobs, you're gonna need this. If you're not doing factory foam blobs, doing go code, you can disregard, throw this out. You won't need it for the build. Final step before we install the ceiling kit is this guy. It's part of your kit. Let's hope the focus works here. It doesn't matter. This is a tap tool. It's part of a tap and die kit. This is a 1/4-20 thread tap. If you have the time, if you're meticulous, I would highly recommend you take this tool and go back through every single one of those plus nuts and rivet nuts, especially the plus nuts. They seem to be a little crunchier. Make sure you've got a nice smooth thread. You shouldn't be using power tools to fasten any of the screws through the ceiling panels into the rivet nuts. You will strip one out. It's only a matter of time. You should only use a screwdriver and it should feel silky smooth when you do it. So grab this guy. I hit it with a couple drops of WD-40. You can definitely go in there dry, but I'd say don't be a dry guy. Get some WD-40, put a little bit on here, go through every single one of those rivet nuts, and once you're done with that, we can start carrying in row 1 and putting it up. All right, we're back in the van. I've got row 1 here. You'll notice row 1's a little weird. I've got a small panel up front and I've got a larger panel for the back. The reason for this is if you have us do your CNC cutout for your Max Air fan, then you're gonna get probably the first row cut in half. If you have larger cutouts, it might be row 2 and 3, but in this case, row 1 will be completely cut. Rows 2 and 3, hugging the outside, are gonna have slight channel cutouts. Now, I'll show you how I mount this. I've got one up in the front, and if you have a helping hand, that would be great. If you don't, no big deal. I like to do these solo, but if I have a friend, it obviously helps. When I do this, I'll put the screw through and I'll actually hold up the weight of the panel on the screwdriver. That makes it really easy for me to eyeball it and get this thing partially threaded. At this point, I will swing around to this center bolt right here, move any insulation or anything like that that might obstruct it out of the way, and get this started too. Now, one important note, your row 1 is actually setting the centering for the rest of the rows. So what I would advise is don't shove it this way, don't max it out that way. Just lift it while you still have some thread, get it as centered as possible on every single one of these beams, and crank it down perfectly centered. If you're off to one side, it's usually not a big deal, but worst case, you'll have to trim a little bit off the edge on one of the outside rows if you're slightly off center. So row 1 is almost in. We'll tighten it up and we'll move on to row 2 next. Okay, before you tighten down the next row, the best thing to do here is put a shim in here. So we'll open up the space up, put a shim in place, and then apply a little bit of pressure to close our gap exactly to 1/8, and at this point we'll tighten it down. You can leave all of these loose and go back to them later at the end of the build. We like to do it up front, but we're going to repeat the shimming process for every single fastener for this whole row and then keep on going. All right, moving right along. I have row number 2 up. The reason I'm not putting 3 up yet is because our wiring for the puck lights is going to go over to the odd number side or the passenger side. If you're going to put your power to the driver's side, I would recommend you put row 3 up first, and let me explain why. Let me pull these out. Sorry for the shaking. I put you guys on the same table. Here are your puck lights inside the package. First thing we'll do is undo these little ties here, get rid of them, and the main reason I don't want to put that other row up is the actual gap once you have insulation up there. It's quite small. Getting your hands over the top to feed wire really sucks when the gap is so small. So I'm going to punch these in on this side first, feed the wires over. That'll make it way easier to get to my wires once I put the opposing side on. This step is pretty important. It's kind of a headache to do later. You don't want to mount the whole ceiling and put your puck lights up first, or put your puck lights up last, I'm sorry. Make sure you put them in first, string the wiring over the side, and just tuck it up as you go. I promise you it's going to go a lot smoother if you follow these steps. All right, moving on now. The lights are all in. I've dumped the wires over the side. There's a step I did. I'll show you in the next clip where we ran the wires forward in this van. But right now you're left with some of these guys, probably 2 of these and 2 of these. If you bought one of our newer kits, we've discontinued these because they're 110 to 12 volt DC adapters or transformers. Most people don't use 110 in vans. So I would say disregard this and put it away. These 2 guys here, these are the 12 volt ballasts. You can plug up to 6 puck lights into each. We have 8 total, so obviously I can't use one for all 8. I'm going to use one for each. This is a good time to think about zoning your lights. If you want a dimmer to just do the rear section over the bed, a dimmer to power the front section, you can just have separate switches run these individually. One other side note here is that there's a plug here that we generally just like pull right off. We rip it off and we cut it, and you're left with 2 wires. The hot wire, or the plus, would be the brown in this case, and the ground is the blue. So don't get those backwards. If you do get them flipped, your dimmers won't work. The lights just won't turn on. There you have it, folks. That is a full installation on the new Serg Supply Transit 148 ceiling kit. Overall, not too difficult. It's much stronger than it's ever been. We've added a bunch of headroom for you taller folks out there. And overall, the only kind of tools you really need for this, again, are a screwdriver, a power drill, and if you have it, an impact gun. Otherwise, everything else is included with the kit. I hope you liked this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. We'd love to interact with you guys. If you have any suggestions for future videos or things you want to learn more about, we'd love to hear about those as well. In any case, I appreciate you sticking around and watching the full video. Thanks again for watching, and happy building.